my name is Gemma Dunn from the Southwark's Autism Support Team, and today we're going to be looking at understanding behaviour, and then next week we will have a look at managing some of that behaviour. So today's session is going to start with looking at understanding human behaviour, and then we will look specifically at autistic behaviour, and looking at some of the difficulties that people with autism may have around behaviour that are specific to autism, then a coffee break, and then in the second half we'll look at some of the ways we try to look at understanding behaviour, so that will be using the iceberg principle and then assessing that behaviour. So we're going to look at behaviour in humans. So behaviour is often, as it says here, a child's loudest voice. So sometimes it's something you can't ignore. As parents, it can be, quite an upsetting form of communication. But we're going to be looking at behaviour because all behaviour serves a function for the child. It gets something for them. It works to achieve an end. And if they exhibit a behaviour and they achieve that end, then the next time they want to achieve that end, they will exhibit that behaviour again. So there are 4 functions of human behaviour that all of us, every behaviour we exhibit is for one of these 4 reasons. So I'm standing here being filmed because that is my job and I get paid to do it. So that is for a tangible reward. So that is why I'm exhibiting this behaviour in my front room. The 4 behaviours that a child might exhibit, the functions of those could be attention, so whether that be positive attention or negative attention. The other one is to get something, so like me getting my money, but like to get an activity or to get that packet of crisps they want, so to get something they might exhibit a behaviour. They might want to escape something or avoid something. So in order to do that, they're going to exhibit a type of behaviour. We will go into these in a bit more detail. And the last kind of behaviour is sensory stimulation. So they're doing it because it feels good. So first activity we've got here, if you look on your sheet that's been sent to you, it's probably best now that you stop the video and do the activity and then come back rather than saving them all till the end. So if you stop, there is an activity sheet. It explains what to do. So you need to look at all the different behaviours that are there, and if you want to cut them out you can, or just in your mind rank them as to what behaviours you think are acceptable and to behaviours you think are unacceptable for a neurotypical average child. So do that and then have a think about how you might change that ranking if the child was autistic. And then have a think about age groups as well. Something that might be acceptable for a 3-year-old, for a 17-year-old isn't so acceptable anymore. So obviously, for you to have a think about, and also if I rank mine, they will be completely different from yours. Because between us, we all have a different value judgment, we all have been brought up differently to value different behaviours and things that we look for. So have a stop and have a go at that. Welcome back. So have you done that activity and can see that our judgments on behaviour do vary. So human behaviour. So people with autism respond in similar ways to everyone else. We all exhibit behaviours all day long. They also exhibit behaviours all day long. They're responding to things, they're learning new behaviours, like every other child is learning behaviours. So they agree to those 4 functions of behaviour. So we've got attention, to gain something, a tangible reward, to escape something, and for sensory stimulation. And it's quite interesting when when you've got the time to think and reflect on your child's behaviour, it's going to be one of those four. Whatever behaviour you see from your child, it's going to be one of those four functions. And once you've worked out what the function is, it's much easier to look at addressing it. For example, if I was to go over and bite somebody, I might bite somebody because I really want their attention. You know, I really like it when they scream. It makes a really nice noise. I'm really enjoying that, and it makes a big fuss, and I like all that attention and things like that. That might be why I bite somebody. Or I might go over and bite somebody because I want the piece of cake they're eating. And if I bite them, they'll probably leave and I'll get to eat their cake. Or I might go over and bite somebody because that person is probably going to come and teach me a math lesson, and I don't want to do that math lesson, but if I bite them, they're probably not going to try and make me do any algebra today. So I've escaped that. Or I might go and bite somebody because I've got a toothache and it's feeling really bad, and if I bite on something it feels better. So obviously me going and biting someone, depending on the function of that behaviour, will affect how I'm going to address it. There's no point taking me to the dentist if I'm biting somebody because I want their cake. But obviously taking me to the dentist if I'm biting because of a toothache will hopefully help that behaviour. So it's really important to understand the function of the behaviour before we can begin to address that. Now, the child can't necessarily tell us what the function of their behaviour is, so it's up to us as adults and carers and educators to work it out for them. You know, a lot of children can't, you ask most children, oh, why did you hit that child? They can't tell you. But, you know, we can be detectives, and that's what we're going to look at today. It's all about understanding that behaviour, putting our detective hat on and thinking, what is the function of this behaviour? So autism does require a little bit of additional thought. So we've done a lot of work through the weeks about increasing our understanding of autism, what it is, what the sort of areas of impairment might be, areas of strength, what they might be, the sensory factors. So looking at that, we're going to bring that knowledge with our knowledge of behaviour and sort of try and get to work out. So behaving unacceptably is part of the human condition. That no child comes out of the womb and behaves perfectly their whole life. Everybody behaves unacceptably. You know, you might have an argument with your partner or your mother. You know, we're adults and but we still behave unacceptably. So don't expect to look at your child and go, well, I'm going to get rid of all this unacceptable behaviour. That's just the way it is. So it's about meeting a need. Always remember that the behaviour is not necessarily to upset you. It's not an emotive thing they're doing. It is meeting a need that they have. Behaviour is not random. It is learnt. It's something they have learnt because it's worked in the past. And even though they might have, let's say a child doesn't want to have a maths lesson, like I was going to go and bite that person because I didn't want them to teach me maths. In the past, maybe they were about to teach me maths, I bit them, I didn't have a maths lesson. Great. Next time they come, I might think, all right, I'll do that again because I don't want the maths lesson. You might teach me a way of saying, you can ask not to have maths today, and I might be able to do that, but it's easier and quicker just to bite him. So I will go for the easier option, especially if language isn't my area of expertise. People's behaviour varies over time. Obviously there are factors that affect all of us. If you're tired, if you're unwell, behaviour will often be, heightened. I know my daughter, when she was little, she'd behave terribly and you'd get very angry with her, and then the next day she'd be poorly and you think, oh, if only you'd told me you were coming down with something, I would have been a bit more understanding. But, she obviously she doesn't have special needs, but she doesn't have the language to tell me that she's not feeling right. But that certainly had an impact on her behaviour. So it will vary over time on how one's feeling, how, if you've had lots of arguments in one day, then you're more likely to have more because you're more anxious or heightened. And also, behaviour can change. Just because I bite someone because I don't want a maths lesson doesn't mean I'm going to bite someone because I want a math for the rest of my life. I can learn new ways, I can develop, I can change, these things happen. But I would probably need some support to do that. It's not just going to change without intervention. So yeah, we talked about how the same behaviour can have different causes. So, we need to really figure out what those are. And some of those behaviours are definitely linked to levels of arousal. So your second handout is a sheet showing the sort of model of arousal. Realistically, it kind of goes in a curve like that. So, we can be quite calm and then, get more upset till we have a kind of real blowout, but then we'll come down. But the come down is as slow as the going up. So don't expect, oh, they've had a meltdown, okay, they're better now, they're back down to here. No. And what often happens is that as a child is calming, if something happens, we try and talk to them, we can make it go back up again. So have a look at that sheet. I'll let you stop now so you can read that. So, hopefully you've had a look at that sheet and can see how, when your child's having, some difficulties with their behaviour, that might be a model to keep in mind when you're dealing with it. So difficult behaviour can be changed with the right planning and the right resources. And, I think one of the main things about this course is about understanding, teaching that so that we can understand where these guys are coming from. So, looking back, we've learnt about what autism spectrum conditions are. We've looked at the triad of impairment. We know that autism can affect people in different ways, socially, physically and intellectually. And we know a little bit about human behaviour now and sort of functions of that. But let's just look a little bit more at some of the areas of autism. So there is something called theory of mind, which is that difficulty in putting yourself in other people's shoes. So often known as mind blindness or theory of mind. It's that when children are sort of around 4, they learn to lie. So, you walk in, they've got chocolate around their mouth and you say, have you been eating chocolate? And they go, no, it was the dog. And obviously that's quite a poor lie, but they'll get better. And that's the moment they learn that I can know something that you don't know because you weren't here. And for children with autism, sometimes that skill can be quite not very well developed. So often that ability to read other people's minds is not as instinctive as we might find it. Obviously it's a skill that can be practiced, can be taught, but like all skills that have to be taught, it becomes a bit clunky. Whereas for a lot of us, we can instinctively know, oh, they weren't here at the meeting last week, so they don't know that. So, we can read other people's mind. We can put ourselves in their shoes so we know how they're feeling, or might be feeling. For children with autism, this can be quite difficult. So, obviously, if you can't read the mind of somebody else or figure out how they're feeling, that's going to impact your ability to some social skills, but also it will impact on behaviour, because if I can't imagine how it might make you feel if I bite you because I don't want my maths lesson, then that is one of the inhibitors of behaviour, is the sort of impact it has on other people. So you've got another handout sheet now about an activity. So let me read you about this. So there is, in San Francisco, there is a man this is a real man, who earns money as a street performer, and what he does is he dresses up as a monkey and he stands in the bushes and he jumps out at people, and obviously gets a good reaction and all the people laugh, and it's, and people give him money. So imagine this was your job and you were dressed as a monkey, I know, stick with me, jumping out at people to, you know, elicit a reaction. Obviously, to start with, they'll probably be very shocked. Then when the relief is over, they might laugh. So you've got a list of people there, and using your judgment, which ones would you jump out at? So having done this, hopefully you see there were some people there that you probably, having mind read the situation and thought about their reaction to it, you wouldn't have jumped out at. Go with the Rottweiler as an example, or, you know, a small child who crying, you wouldn't jump out at, because we can read the situation that this person is not really in the mood for a joke. But if you were a child with autism, you know, those, it'd be interesting to, you know, give them the list. Which ones would they jump out at? I expect it's different from our list. So just reading, helping you understand how important mind blindness can be when you can't read other people's minds, how difficult it is to navigate through behaviour. Okay, also thinking about autism, thinking about, you know, if you work in an office, you know, there are certain rules, there are certain social rules, you know, how close you stand next to somebody, if you're waiting for the photocopier, you know, if you were to be in an office and somebody was to stand just a little too close, you can feel it. For people with autism, they can't necessarily feel it. They can be taught what an appropriate distance is, but someone actually has to teach them that, because it's not going to kind of be picked up on in the same way. So people with autism generally sort of look at details rather than the kind of big picture, so often might misread some of those sort of non-verbal skills, non-verbal messages that people are giving about, you know, if someone's a bit close, you might move your body a little bit, but if you're too busy focusing on the small details of that, you might miss those little clues of how to read a social situation. Obviously, you know, attention to detail can be a great skill. If you're going to design me a bridge, I want you to, you know, be very attention focused, but if you're standing behind me at the photocopier, it's different. Something else with children with autism or people with autism is something called executive functioning. So that is the ability to, we have talked about this, but, you know, looking at predicting outcomes, planning and predictions. And this is an area that they can, you know, not have the greatest skills in, still developing. So when you're thinking about behaviour, they might not be predicting the outcomes of their behaviour. They might scream because they want something and not think about, actually later on that might mean I don't go swimming at the weekend because I've behaved badly today. They're not really thinking about the outcomes longer term. So obviously we know children and people with autism like routines, and often they might have a special interest. Now those things can be really helpful because they can help to provide order in their lives, a bit of predictability, can be very reassuring to children. So we need to think about how we might use some of these things to support us looking at behaviour. So if we are going to change behaviour, we need to, as adults, sit down and think, does the behaviour need to be changed? That's the first thing. You know, some behaviours, so a child might come home from school every day and spin around for half an hour. Does that behaviour need to be changed? It might be a bit, you know, annoying, not fit in with us, but it's serving a purpose for them. Is that not something they can continue to do? Do we need to stop it? Maybe not. But if they're coming home and, you know, hitting their sister every day, then that maybe is something we need to think about changing. But we need to decide, do we actually need to change this behaviour? Can the behaviour be something positive? So if the child's coming home and spinning, You'll be knocking into things. Maybe you need to change your routine and go to the playground after school and let them go on the roundabout. Get it out that way. Could it be a positive activity that they could do? So it needs to be thought about. Time for a coffee break. Go, drink coffee, come back. Welcome back. So, after this break, now what we're going to look at is we're going to look at understanding behaviour by using the iceberg principle. And then we're going to look at assessing that behaviour, and here we go. So, I said earlier, it's about being a detective. You have to work out what's going on. Why are they behaving in this way? What is the function of their behaviour? And so in order to do that, you really need to get some sort of information about it. We'll be looking next week we'll start to look at ABC charts, which is something I often use in schools, because often when you're, living day to day, you might not see the patterns. So you might kind of notice that, every other Thursday, we're seeing this real spike in their behaviour. What could that be? And then, you might be able to look at school and go, oh, right, that's when, they have PE, or that's when their teacher has PPA. Maybe that is affecting them, making them more anxious. But unless you start to track that behaviour, you're not going to know those things. So if we're being a detective for behaviour, we need to look at what happens before the behaviour, what the behaviour looks like, and what happens afterwards. And that is that if we have that information, it can help us to be a detective rather than just a bit of guesswork. So there are two different ways of looking at that. One is the iceberg principle, and one is the star analysis. So we'll look at the iceberg first. So thinking about this, we're thinking that this is the behaviour that we see, the tip of the iceberg. So that is what we can see. But underneath, there is a whole lot going on that we can't see, but we can kind of hypothesise about. And there are sort of underlying difficulties. So we're obviously going to think about that, and we're going to think about it from the perspective of autism. So we've got an example here. We've got Megan, who sits very close to people and may hug complete strangers. So we've got to try and think of it from Megan's point of view. Why might Megan be doing this? So some of the underlying difficulties might be, and as I say, because these are unseen, they are kind of hypotheses, they're guesses. So it might be that Megan doesn't understand social rules about personal space and boundaries. So maybe we could look at teaching her those things. Megan is very literal with her emotions. If she likes somebody, she hugs them. So, she might see a man on the street, I like his hat, I'm going to hug him. So we need to maybe do some work around teaching Megan about how we express emotions, or about stranger danger, things like that. Megan is unable to put herself in other people's shoes and realise it might be embarrassing or be a bit of a risk. So those might be some of the reasons why Megan is hugging complete strangers. So we can sort of test these hypotheses by sort of, teaching her about personal space and boundaries. And then is her behaviour improving? Oh, great, then obviously that's helping her. So with Megan, you might think about teaching the use of personal space and safety. So we might teach her that, people who are in the red, in the inner circle, those are people that you can hug whenever you want. People in the yellow, you can hug when you first meet them or when you're saying goodbye. And people in the outer circle are people that you don't ever hug. And so you can then, once a child has an understanding of something like that, you can say, oh no, that's a blue person, that's a red person, yes, that's okay. So then they can understand, the quite complex social rules that we have can be simplified and presented in a visual way. So looking at Yusuf now. So Yusuf constantly interrupts conversations. So what might be the underlying difficulties as to why Yusuf is interrupting conversations? It might be that he doesn't understand the social rules of conversation. So that again might be something we need to teach him. It might be that he's just so desperately keen to talk about his love of the London Underground and all the stops on the Circle Line that he just keeps interrupting because that's the only thing he wants to talk about. It could be that he's not picking up on those non-verbal cues that actually no one wants to hear about what stations are on the Circle Line. We're all sitting there bored, but he's just thinking, this is great. So it might be that with Yusuf you want to create an explicit rule. So you're allowed to talk about Circle Line underground stations for 10 minutes every day before school. You set a timer and that's how long you've got, and that's it. That is the rule. You can't talk about Circle Line stations at any other point. So you might do something like that. You might practice conversations and actually sit down and go, well, let's look at how to have a conversation. Let's watch a video, let's watch EastEnders, maybe not EastEnders, but let's watch something where we can and actually point out, look, this is how a conversation works. People don't just start talking. Look, they started by saying, how are you? What did you do today? You know, practicing those things. Using prompts and rewards, so maybe, you know, giving him some other things he can talk about. Obviously he's socially motivated, he wants to converse with people, and he thinks his favourite thing is the Circle Line station, so everyone must love the Circle Line stations. Actually teaching them, here are some other conversations you could have. You could ask them what they watched on TV. And there is, we did talk in, I think, the communication session about social stories. You can use social stories to help to educate around how to have a conversation. So, Jonathan, he has a preoccupation with roller coasters. So why might this, you know, why might his preoccupation be roller coasters? Let's hazard a guess. So Jonathan experiences the world as chaotic, and maybe his special interest is giving him some sort of order and sense of certainty. Roller coaster is very predictable. Or it could be that Jonathan finds it very difficult to vary his interest because that requires a lot of imagination and that's not something maybe he's got. So it's a bit scary for him, so he's just going to stick with the one thing he knows. And he cannot put himself in other people's shoes and realise that not everybody is interested in roller coasters. So it might be that we use roller coasters as a bit of a carrot for Jonathan. So we're not going to, you know, try and stop him being interested in roller coasters. I know some people who are very interested in Tottenham Hotspurs, and you know, seems very unusual to me, but I'm not going to stop them. So I'm not going to stop Jonathan's interest in roller coaster, but I might set some limits on it. You know, I think maybe watching roller coaster videos for 11 hours a day might be too much, so I might set a limit on how much he's allowed to look at roller coasters or talk about roller coasters or draw pictures of roller coasters. But I might use it positively. I might use it as a reward. And if I know he really loves roller coasters, maybe I could get him to do some chores around the house, you know, every day, and then with the reward of, at the end of the month, we'll go to Chessington World of Adventures and we'll go on the roller coasters. So I could use their reward, his motivator in a positive way to reward him. So Patrick often puts his hands over his ears. So thinking about the underlying issues, does Patrick have an ear infection? Sometimes it's as simple as that. And if the child doesn't have a way of expressing that they're in pain, because pain is quite a subjective thing that, you know, it's quite hard to find the words to explain that, so that's certainly worth checking things like ear infections. It could be that Patrick has difficulty processing sounds, so, you know, specific sounds might really grate on him, and so, you know, it could be a metallic sounds or high-pitched sounds, so he's going to try and block those out. Or it could be that he is experiencing overload, and obviously we've talked about that in the sensory week, so I'm not going to go into it in too much detail. So, how can we help Patrick in this situation? So it might be about using a practical item like headphones or earplugs, or trying to minimise the noises that maybe are upsetting for him. We're going to, give clear instructions, ask the child to repeat instructions, and then, we're going to make it sure that the child knows when they're supposed to be listening and what they're supposed to be listening to. Often in classrooms, a child might be listening to the buzzing sound of the computer and not realise that they're meant to be listening to the teacher at that point. So making sure that we are aware that the sounds can be difficult for Patrick, and we're going to, not assume that he's listening to us. So Brian stares at and often talks loudly about and to people who have a disability on the street. Now, I think we've all been there with our children when they were younger. Why's that man got no legs? What's wrong with that man's face? And it was just, we want to crumble inside a little bit. But obviously, if Brian is not a 3-year-old child, maybe Brian is a 27-year-old man, people are a lot less tolerant of a 27-year-old man going, why's that man got no legs? Yeah, it could be a problem. So some of the underlying difficulties, it might not be as simple as just one, when we've been looking at the last ones, we've been looking at communication, sensory, social. It could be a mixture of all of those. So it could be that Brian doesn't pick up on the sort of non-verbal and verbal cues, that, someone doesn't want to talk to them. It could be that Brian's imagination he finds it very difficult because he has a very fixed view of what a person is. A person is someone with 2 arms and 2 legs. So if you see someone with no legs or just 1 leg, that might be really confusing for them. So he needs to find out why, and that's why he has to talk to them. So maybe you could do some work around, everybody's got everybody's a different, and these are all humans, and this is what they all look like, and why people might not have legs. It could be social, because he's unable to put himself in that position and realise that actually might be a bit embarrassing or hurtful to make comments like that. Or it could be a sensory thing. It might be that he's very loud, and because he's undersensitive to sound, so he's quite a loud person generally. So it could be all of those reasons, or a combination of those reasons, but using this iceberg method to kind of get us to think about what's going on underneath from their point of view can be really helpful for how to move forward with behaviours. So thinking about the underlying difficulties, and then it helps you to think about any potential interventions. So you have got a blank iceberg, so you need to stop this now, and you're going to need to have a think about your child and a specific behaviour that they exhibit, or that you've noticed, or that's happened in the past. Think about what behaviour you see, and then start to think about the whys. Have a guess, as using your understanding of autism, why you're seeing those behaviours. And it can be quite a helpful, reflective activity. Hopefully you've done that and are all the wiser, and maybe you've actually come up with some different strategies that you might want to use with your child. So hopefully you found that useful. So that was the iceberg principle. So this is now STAR analysis. So looking at analysing behaviour using the STAR. So STAR stands for settings, trigger, action and results. So another one that some people use is called the ABC chart. So you might hear the schools talking about, we're tracking behaviour on an ABC chart, and that stands for antecedent, behaviour, consequence. So it's very similar, just different letters really. So this can be quite helpful, because sometimes the setting or the context can actually have a real impact on behaviour. So it might be that it's only when you're at grandma's house that you see a certain behaviour. And so that might make you start to think about, what is it about grandma's or grandma's house that is, causing this behaviour? Is it because he doesn't want to be there? And maybe behaviour is to escape because, when it gets too bad, we just go, oh, fine, I'll go home. So sometimes the setting can have a real impact on that. Also thinking about triggers, what was it? Because often what happens, I think we've all felt that when we're stressed, and we're tired, and everything's going wrong, and you've had this argument, and you drop a spoon, and then you just lose it. Now obviously dropping the spoon was the trigger, but it was the build-up that was quite important. But it can be useful to look at the triggers. What was actually the thing that tipped over the edge? So actions, what was the actual behaviour that you saw? What were they doing? A behaviour is not kicking off. That is not a behaviour. Having a tantrum is not a behaviour. Behaviour is, what did they actually do? Did they lie on the floor? Did they kick their legs? Did they throw things? Did they scream? How long for? Actually looking at the behaviour so that if you write down a description of the behaviour, I should be able to recognise it from the description. Because my child's tantrum looks very different from your child's tantrum. So how do I know when I'm seeing a tantrum? I need to have, let's look at what actually are they doing. And I know it can be really difficult when you're in the middle of dealing with all this, stuff, to stand back and be objective, but to move forward, it's really important to be objective. So even if you can't, make a note of things as you're doing it, as soon after as you can, actually write down and record these behaviours because it can help you to keep a track of things and look for patterns. And then the result. Sometimes the result might be the reason for the behaviour, as in, if you left grandma's house when you behaved badly, the result was we left grandma's house. That might be why we're seeing this behaviour. So sometimes the settings and the triggers and those things are really important. Sometimes it's really important to look at the results. It can help you. So, thank you very much for listening. You've got a home learning activity, which is to think about a behaviour your child is exhibiting, which has nothing to do with autism. So just a normal human behaviour that any child you might see. And then have a think about a behaviour you think that actually some of the underlying things that are causing it has to do with the autism. So have a little think about that. Quite a lot to think about this week, and look at behaviour in your child, and I look forward to speaking to you on Zoom about it. Thank you.